Don't Let the Forest In by C. G. Drews. Chapter 2. Andrew should be forgotten. That is what happened to the quiet ones, the wallflowers. When people like him made a friend like Thomas, there should be nowhere to stand in the wake of glory and chaos that Thomas left behind. But Thomas always looked over his shoulder before turning a corner, always reached back to tug Andrew after him. It seemed as natural to him as breathing, that need to check that Andrew hadn't been left behind. He dreaded the day that Thomas would drop the habit, but he still hadn't. Even after they detoured past the dorms to the dump lounge and joined the stream of students pouring into the halls of Wickwood Academy, Thomas still reached back to stop him from being separated in the crush. Andrew was drunk with relief. Let this be the one thing that never changed. Dove was already changing everything else. She should be there with them, bickering with Thomas about something inane until he shot back a quip that startled her into a laugh. Instead, Dove's icy war must be extending to Thomas, too. Andrew knew that they had some massive blow-up before school let up for the summer. He had decided to stay out of it this time. But they usually smoothed things over by pretending it never happened. Andrew couldn't live like that. If one thing went wrong, it festered into his chest until he couldn't bear it, and then someone would have to fix it for him before he spiraled. Dove could be catching up with some friends. She had a dramatic academic rivalry with her roommate, Lana Lang, the kind where they battled for top of the class all day, but as soon as 4 p.m. hit, they were sharing sour Skittles and snorting over inside jokes. Dove plus Lana did not drift into Dove plus Thomas plus Andrew, though. They orbited separate suns, possibly because Thomas had no time, interest, or tolerance for most people, and he'd let them know it, too. Other people existed only in Thomas's periphery, but the Perrault twins eclipsed his entire galaxy. There was something intoxicating about meaning that much to one person. Addictive. But Andrew knew he would never admit it aloud. "I have to tell you something," Thomas said, his words half lost in the rising chatter of the other students. "Tonight when we sneak out to stargaze..." "Oh, should we still do that?" He shot Andrew a worried look. "We shouldn't, right?" Why? Because they were seniors now? Thomas had a chronic need to fight for every role ever, so worrying wasn't like him. "I still want to," Andrew said. Lines smoothed on Thomas's forehead. "I'll tell you everything tonight, but you swear to believe me?" "Well, that's cryptic," Andrew started, but Thomas's fingers dug into his sleeve hard enough for him to forget what he was even saying. Thomas stared over Andrew's shoulder, his eyes gone waxy with fear. Nothing ever scared him. Confused, Andrew twisted to look, but all he saw was the Wickwood uniforms and bright faces. Then a knot of students cleared, and Andrew understood. Principal Adelaide Grant stood in the foyer with his arms folded in a stony expression. She looked as if she had been pulled from a black and white photograph. Crisp pantsuit, white skin against her whiter hair, piercing eyes that noticed everything. Thomas collected reprimands and suspensions from her like confetti. It meant they knew each other well, Thomas and the principal. Their eyes locked across the room, and a frown darkened on her face. "Isn't it too early for you to be in trouble?" Andrew said, but then he noticed who the principal had been talking to. 2 cops stood at her side, stances casual as they glanced around. Wickwood did take a moment to absorb. The heavy Victorian drapes and the dark carpets, the chandeliers and the oil paintings and gilded cornices, the smell of mothballs and old books, of ambition and timeless traditions. One of the cops wore a cream trench coat and just finished flashing a detective badge. She followed the principal's gaze. Thomas turned and yanked Andrew after him, carving a path into the auditorium with his jabbing elbows and a ferocious scowl. "What did you do?" Andrew hissed. "Nothing. I just got here, same as you." They needed to find 3 seats. Dove would catch up to them before announcements started for sure. But Andrew didn't have time to voice this before Thomas crammed him into one of the back rows. All of the performances and awards nights happened here, and it had the air of an old theater with red velvet chairs and moody lighting. "Are we hiding?" Andrew whispered. Thomas glared at the row of shiny ponytails in front of them. Juniors, all talking with their phones out. "I'm telling you, she hates me specifically," Thomas fidgeted, trying to get comfortable. "Those cops are probably here to lecture us about drugs or something." "You'd know." "That was one time. I have got to grow up to you all the way this year so you can stop being so innocent." I break rules sometimes. Only if I drag you into it. Thomas knocked his knee against Andrew's. You won't even steal a pencil. You know what you need? You, me, stargazing, and vodka. I'm deeply interested in what you'd have to say with no filter. Andrew was deeply interested in that never happening. He couldn't risk allowing his mouth to say things that he only dared to scream into his head. He knew he was blushing because Thomas grinned deviously. One of the junior girls shot a scathing gaze over her shoulder. Excuse me, are you talking about illicit activities? Her whisper was loud enough for all of her friends to hear. Yes, we're going to steal all the pencils in the school, Thomas said. I can report you, she hissed. They're cracking down on us this year, and whoever's been selling Adderall is getting caught. Same goes for anyone sneaking off campus into the forest, too. You all people should respect that. Several more of the ponytail girls turned with their lips pursed. A few looked pityingly at Andrew. Oh my God, are they the ones from that thing that happened last year? One whispered to her friend. I'm surprised they came back. Thomas started to raise a finger, but Andrew grabbed his hand and slammed it down. He maintained a neutral expression until all the girls turned away, but his heart raced. He didn't know what that was all about. Maybe because of what he'd done to his hand? But it shouldn't be something the whole school would gossip over. He wasn't interesting enough to care about like that. A few rows ahead, Andrew caught sight of the back of Dove's blazer, where she sat with her AP class friends. She laughed at something a friend said before casting a quick glance over her shoulder. She must have locked eyes with Thomas, because she frowned and his scowl deepened in response. They looked away at the same time. A microphone crackled as the professor approached the podium and began the morning announcements. Time for an enthusiastic lecture about giving Wickford your all, followed by a reminder of all the golden students who graduated to Ivy League colleges. Everyone here was handpicked for excellence. Time to achieve, to thrive. Except the reality was that most of these kids were here thanks to the parents' bank accounts. Dove had aced the entrance exams on her own genius, but Andrew clung on by luck, and their father paying the steep tuition with a little extra for donations when pressed. Thomas stood squarely in the middle. His parents were artists and wore wealth like a disposable plastic, selling a piece worth hundreds of thousands one day and impulsively burning through the money the next. It meant Thomas went to an incredibly expensive school and yet wore his uniforms to threadbare rags before getting new ones. His grades slumped worse than Andrew's, but at least he had his art. Thomas was viciously talented. Andrew wrote cruelly beautiful fairy tales, and Thomas could illustrate them with a few slashes of a pen with such macabre beauty that even his teachers overlooked his endless attitude problems. Andrew tried to listen to the professor drone on, but all he could think about were those cops. It couldn't be about Thomas. No, it couldn't. Except one look at Thomas, and anyone could see his mouth was crammed full of thorns and lies. If Dove had sat with them, she would have surgically removed all of Thomas's bullshit and figured out what the truth was by now. Andrew kept his voice low. You and Dove fought before the summer break, right? And you never made up? Thomas bit his thumbnail. No. That explained it. One of them had to give first, and this time it seemed like their individual stubbornness was winning. The principal took over the microphone for a motivational speech about exams and excellence, and subtle threats about zero tolerance for substance abuse or prank wars. No police lurked by. Maybe they'd left. Andrew realized that he was still pinning Thomas's hand to the seat, his fingers with their web of delicate scars resting over Thomas's charcoal-smudged knuckles. He snatched his hand away. Thomas didn't look at him, just folded his arms and slouched deeper. Andrew had to get Thomas and Dove to make up, but later. He was too tired right now. Summer at his father's Australian house had left him thinned, and the flight back to America was always brutal, jet lag leaving his eyes bruised. He fantasized about dissolving into his blankets back at the dorm while Thomas went off into a rant about how math was offensive, or how he belonged in the forest like some sort of fey child who planned to run away to the trees and never look back. By the time assembly let out, the halls flooded with students headed for class. Thomas looked gray from choking back his own secrets. It didn't help that the principal made a beeline for him. I'm pretty sure she'll walk past, Thomas said. She did not. Hello, gentlemen, Principal Grant said. About dissolving into his blankets back at the dorm while Thomas went off into a rant about how math was offensive, or how he belonged in the forest like some sort of fey child who planned to run away to the trees and never look back. By the time assembly let out, the halls flooded with students headed for class. Thomas looked gray from choking back his own secrets. It didn't help that the principal made a beeline for him. "I'm pretty sure she'll walk past," Thomas said. She did not. "Hello, gentlemen," Principal Grant said. "I hope you're both well. Mr. Perrault, you had a safe flight? And Mr. Rye, I see you've neglected your blazer. Good thing you have time to rectify that before class. But first, I must borrow you for a moment." The cops hadn't left, Andrew now saw. They stood at the stairwell leading up to the faculty offices. Students flowed around them, whispering behind cupped hands. "I didn't do anything," said Thomas, too high-pitched. Concern softened the principal's face, and that was more terrifying than a reprimand. "Unfortunately, this is about your parents. Those officers need to ask you a few questions." Andrew glanced at Thomas, but the other boy's face had gone blank. Did he seem smaller than usual? Messier? His auburn hair stuck out in unkept tufts. Then there was the blood on his sleeve. Principal Grant turned for the stairs, but Thomas stood frozen. Andrew unbuttoned his blazer. "Take this. Cover the stain," he didn't add. Thomas tugged it on, the sleeves a little too long for him. "Come with me?" The principal had made it to the stairs and cast them a stern look. "You may catch up with your friends in class, Mr. Rye. Come." Thomas trudged up the stairs, the cops at his heels. A gallows march. Andrew's chest tightened, and he felt lightheaded all of a sudden. Returning to Wickwood and Thomas was meant to make everything better. Nothing should be unraveling this fast. Andrew couldn't follow, but damn it, he had to. He waited a few moments, chewing the inside of his cheek, and then ducked up the stairs. The faculty floor was forbidden without a permission slip, but Thomas had whispered, "Come with me," so nothing else mattered. Andrew slipped soundlessly down the halls of antique burgundy carpets and dark mahogany doors against chestnut wallpaper. Priceless art covers the walls in gilded frames. It was hard not to feel smothered by the decadence of this place. He put his ear to the principal's closed door and tried not to breathe. Muffled voices. The thump of feet on carpet. Andrew knew 2 leather armchairs sat before the principal's intimidating desk, and behind it were ceiling-high bookshelves stacked with classics and antiques. It didn't sound like anyone had bothered to sit. "Explain the situation to ya, son." "My name is Detective Stephanie Bell. Why don't you take a seat?" "I'm fine." That was Thomas, his furies tightly laced. "First off, can you tell us what happened when you arrived at school?" Bell's voice sounded chill and efficient, a frost that would unapologetically burn anything new and green. No one asked, "Where were you?" type questions for good reasons. Andrew's skin felt too tight. "This morning," Thomas said, guarded. "You live in the city, an hour's drive, isn't it?" "I took an early bus." "Do you still have your ticket? Is it time-stamped?" "Officers!" The principal had an odd edge to her voice. "I was informed this would be a meeting to relay sensitive information, not an interrogation. Do I need to place a call with his guardians?" "Unfortunately, that's why we're here, Miss Dr. Grant." "My apologies. This is following up on a concerning 911 call. Neighbors reported hearing loud noises coming from your home last night, Mr. Rye. Screams." Andrew forgot how to breathe. The moment didn't seem real. Kneeling bunched up next to the keyhole, listening to his best friend, his heart being dissected. "No one was home this morning," the detective went on. "House was trashed. Looks like an animal tore through. And there's blood. Due to the volume of blood, we summarize it's not yours. So we were wondering if you knew anything about that." "Excuse me!" Footsteps sounded like the principal's had marched out from behind her desk. "Does Thomas need a lawyer present? What exactly are you implying?" "Not implying anything, ma'am. We're merely trying to get a hold of the boy's parents, but no one is answering calls." "Did you say they were going out of town, Thomas?" Silence. It lasted a beat too long before Thomas mumbled, "I don't know, maybe." It was quite a lot of blood. "Did you inquire at local hospitals?" the principal said. "Of course, ma'am." "So, Thomas, was there a fight last night? Or a party, maybe? Anything get a bit rough?" "No." Thomas spit out the word like he wanted it to eviscerate the detective. "I don't know anything. I had already left." Belle's voice sharpened. "But you said you only left this morning." "Yes, really early. It was still dark. That's what I meant." "All right, no need to get agitated. We're sure you're worried about your parents." Thomas didn't sound worried. That was the first thing that Andrew noticed. But maybe he could read Thomas too well. He imagined Thomas's body language right now, taut and defensive, fingers picking at his bottom lip or a loose thread. I'm sure you folks are fine, but we'll have to get the blood tested and continue trying to locate them. Dr. Grant, would you reach out to his emergency contact and alert them of the situation?" The voices continued for a minute as information was exchanged, and then the doorknob turned. Andrew's brain caught up a beat too late as the office door started opening. Then he remembered to run. He made it to the top of the stairs before realizing flinging himself down would look even more guilty. He was so bad at subterfuge. He pretended to stare at one of the vaguely impressionistic art pieces on the wall as the cops passed behind him. "Did you think?" "The kid is lying," the detective said with finality, "and I want to know why." Her eyes met Andrew's and she immediately cut off. Her smile became thin, barely polite. Then she continued down the stairs after her colleague. Behind him, the principal cleared her throat. Andrew turned slowly, his cheeks burning. "Why, Mr. Perrault?" Principal Grant said, unimpressed. "I believe you're missing first period." "I lost something?" Andrew said. A pencil." Next to her, Thomas had been attempting to control his scowl, but at this, he raised one eyebrow at Andrew. "Sir, it was a bad lie. Fine. But Andrew wasn't exactly well practiced at sneaking about." "Despite my better judgment," the principal said, "I will believe you are not lurking at doors where you don't belong. This meeting contained private information, and I won't have gossip in the halls, Mr. Perrault." Andrew nodded far too fast. The principal turned back to Thomas. "I'll inform your aunt, but I'm sure there's no cause to worry. Your parents are eccentric, as we all are aware. I'm sure you'll hear from them before the day's out." Thomas said nothing. The principal gestured for him to go downstairs before casting Andrew a stern look. "You may leave." The grim set of her mouth said, "Get going or detention." So Andrew shot after Thomas. They fell into step as they headed for English, but Andrew felt so shaken that he couldn't even remember where the classroom was. Thomas still wouldn't look at him. "Kid is lying. What's going on?" Andrew's voice barely passed a whisper. "Is this what you were going to tell me about?" "Nothing. You heard them. My parents are weird about their art. It's probably not even blood. I don't know. I don't..." He broke off and tugged at his bottom lip. Andrew nearly tripped. Thomas never stumbled over his words. He also never lied to his best friend. The corridor was empty. Classroom doors closed. They'd be marked tardy before the school year had even taken its first proper breath. Andrew started to say as much, but Thomas snatched his wrist and dragged him into a small alcove. They pressed close into the thick velvet drapes by a huge window, just most dancing against the glass. The world felt too quiet, too heavy. Every breath seemed to tremble on Thomas's lungs. "It's not going to be like last year." Something desperate shone in his eyes. "Nothing bad will happen to you, I swear." Bad things were happening to Thomas, not Andrew. He was the one who needed protecting right now. Andrew couldn't help noticing that not one adult had asked Thomas if he was all right. "I'll sort this out," Thomas said. "I want you making yourself sick over it. I'll fix everything. Do you believe me?" If they stood any closer together, they could fit into each other's skin. "I want you to say it." Thomas's voice steadied. He could pin Andrew to the wall with the way he shaped those words. "I believe you," Andrew whispered.